Hi, I'm Olivia Clark, and I did my capstone project on the evolutionary gaps in the Hawaiian Islands. My thesis is on the evolutionary gaps in native species niches that allow invasive species to establish and take over ecosystems in the Hawaiian Islands. This fits in with Group 4's theme of competition because of the pressure introduced species put on native species in Hawaii. So here's a quick overview of the presentation. First, I'll define what a niche is, then go over introduced versus invasive species. I'll talk about why Hawaii is known to some as the endangered species capital of the world. I'll talk a little bit about the evolution and speciation on the islands, and then I'll address the counterarguments of if introduced species are part of evolution and if we need them to replace extinct species. And then I'll end on future directions. A niche is a range of environmental conditions where a species population can persist. And this is a photo of East Maui silver sword that is endemic to the Mauna Kea on the island of Hawaii and nowhere else in the world. There are many examples like this in the Hawaiian Islands that just inhabit a very small ecosystem. And scientists are using the term niche to figure out who can coexist in this habitat with the introduction of species that are foreign. So what is an introduced species and invasive species, and how does an introduced become invasive? Well, an introduced species is a species purposely brought to the one region from another by humans. An invasive species is a species that establishes a breeding population where it has not occupied and causes stress on native species, whether that be purposefully brought or on accident. So here's an example of pigs that were introduced by the Polynesians in the 1500s for food. And now pigs are considered the most damaging introduced species in Hawaii, and I will talk a little bit more on that in a few slides. Before getting into that, though, I want to talk a little bit about the evolution and speciation on the islands. The oldest active island is 30 million years old. You can see in figure 1 at the bottom right. The active islands, or the islands that are just above sea level, are indicated with black, whereas the rest going all the way up, I guess you could say going northwest, would be all the archipelago volcanic chains that have actually been underwater for a long time. And the evolution of Hawaii is fairly recent as compared to the evolution of land, plants, and animals on Earth 400 million years ago. Hawaii is also extremely isolated. It's 3,700 kilometers away from the nearest continent. 4.7 million years ago, we start seeing modern lineages that we know today in Hawaii. These species are said to have gotten there by wind, water, and birds, either on their wings, feet, or in their digestive tracts. There have been hypothesized 300 colonization events that have likely occurred on the islands, and that's about one species every 25,000 years. Early plant species had similarities in that they had small, lightweight, or otherwise movable seeds, and that they were kind of weedy and had monoecious reproductive structures, or they had both male and female parts on one flower. Because of the small number of colonization events, the rate of evolution and speciation are much higher than immigration in Hawaii. Because of Hawaii's extreme isolation, colonists evolved free from competition. There were no native reptiles, amphibians, or mammals, except for one native seal species. This allowed the colonizing species to lose their pre-existing defenses, such as thorns, toxins, or the ability to fly. And on the left here is a photo of Moa Nala, a group of flightless birds that used to live in Hawaii before the Polynesians arrived. And this is just a sketch of what they may have looked like. There are several reasons why Hawaii is more prone to invasion than other places on Earth, and the number one being that the geographic isolation of the islands and the lack of natural predators that I just talked about in the last slide. Another is the small species population size, and that just limits genetic variability in case of something happening. They don't have very much adaptability. And it's also just interesting that 25% of Hawaiian vascular plants are known from fewer than 100 individuals, and that's from Guffison 2014. The hot and humid climate also allows many alien species or introduced species to thrive, and it is also a great vacation spot. And I'm only mentioning that because that's a great way for invasions to come in on airplanes. And the Department of Agriculture at the Kailua Airport found over 100 alien species entering cargo in a 9-month period. So just a ton of invasive species coming in even when people are vacationing in their suitcases, on their shoes, in the plane wheels, like everywhere. To many scientists, Hawaii is known as the endangered species capital of the world. Before humans arrived, 1,765 native species lived in Hawaii. Of those, 98% were endemic. Today, there are 4,600 species of introduced vascular plants, and that's just introduced vascular plants. Of those, 700 are reproducing and maintaining populations. There are roughly 40 introduced species coming to Hawaii each year. Because of the arrival of humans and transportation sector, we have reversed rates of speciation exceeding extinction, and now extinction is surpassing speciation in Hawaii. There are many, many introduced species in Hawaii. I just decided to choose one mammal species in particular, pigs, and I'll talk about a few more in the next few slides. But pigs are really known as the most disruptive introduced species. They directly trample and graze native vegetation, and indirectly they cause erosion problems and the spread of other non-native species, whether it be seeds stuck on their hooves, skin, or in their digestive tracts. Pigs also look for plants that have fragile stems, such as ferns, but there are many other plants that pigs will often graze on. They also look for non-native earthworms in bog ecosystems, which makes up a lot of their diet. And while they're doing that, they can remove up to 100% of native vegetation in bogs with trampling them. And they also create excellent habitat for avian malaria, which is a huge threat to bird species. 70% of all native birds have already gone extinct on the islands. Next, I want to talk about young volcanic sites. A year after a volcanic eruption, Oia Leua is the first tree to typically recolonize a volcanic area. It is characterized by its lightweight seeds that are very easy to disperse, and it grows in nearly every ecosystem in Hawaii. Once it's established, it helps other native species establish, and these volcanic sites are very low in nutrients, so it's typically preferred that these species don't have very much nutrients to grow. Fire tree, or Myrica fava, is an invasive species that fixes nitrogen and forms dense stands at these young volcanic sites. It competes with Oia, and it typically dominates during primary succession. You can see in Table 1 that it fixes nearly 4 times as much nitrogen as all other natural or native nitrogen fixing in the volcanic sites. And remember that those native plants are not evolved to grow in high nitrogen soil, so though we might think it's a good thing, it's really horrible and destroys a lot of native vegetation. Other ecosystem altering invasive species are fire adapted grasses. In Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, there's bush beardgrass and molasses grass that invades in canopy gaps in the woodlands and provides excellent fuel for fires. Before the invasion of these two grasses, there were 27 fires burned, 4 hectares per fire in 48 years. 20 years after the invasion, or 20 years while those grasses were there were 58 fires burned and 205 hectares per fire. So not only did the number of fires increase, but the number of area burned increased. And fire increases nutrients, which also favors the grassland and savanna. So you can see where there's woody vegetation in figure 3, and once you introduce alien grass species, it only encourages fire, and the feedback loop just keeps moving towards grassland and savanna and away from woody vegetation until you stop fire. Some people argue that introduced species are part of evolution. Introduced species invade ecosystems similar to native species as part of secondary succession, and that there's nothing special about introduced species as opposed to native species expanding their range. However, the introduced and invasive species we see in Hawaii have been caused by humans moving them to the islands either purposefully or accidentally, and we've seen a rate of extinction in Hawaii from the native species only increase once humans have arrived. The native flora, as I mentioned before, are at such an unfair advantage because they evolved free from competition, whereas invasive species, which are mainly from mainlands, are adapted to have defenses and be competitive. And human-caused biological invasions are long-term, and reversing them may take thousands of years and many, many thousands of dollars. Some scientists argue that we need to introduce species to fill the role of extinct species, and Aslan 2013 did an experiment on just this to see, they did observations on visitations and pollination treatments. So they observed the Japanese white-eye, which is an introduced generalist bird species, and 3 endemic Claremontia species. And these flowering species are unique because they all have a very curved flower to be pollinated by the Hawaiian honeycreepers, which their particular species have become extinct, so their populations are being threatened. And the study found that the Japanese white eyes did visit Parvia flora and Montes Loa. However, the bird did not visit Hawaiianesis. So the generalist did increase seed production in the 2 species that it did visit, but they hypothesized that the morphology of the bird did not align correctly with Hawaiianensis, so the pollination did not occur. Introducing a species should take caution. Mutualisms can boost non-native species performance, which could be extremely dangerous. And introducing a new species will have consequences, and we really do not understand enough about how evolution shapes an environment. So I think we should take extreme caution with that. And since human colonization, 70% of Hawaiian bird species have become extinct, and they found that the Japanese white-eye is actually a nectar robber for some plants that are extremely prevalent on the islands. Hawaii is less than 0.2% of the U.S. landmass, yet 1/3 of the nation's endangered and threatened species lists are from Hawaii. Since the arrival of humans, 10% of native plants have gone extinct, and 45 are threatened or endangered. The isolation allowed colonists to evolve free from competition. Yet the colonizing species lost their pre-defenses, such as thorns, toxins, and their ability to fly, which decreases their competition or survival against non-native species. So I want to close with the future directions of Hawaii. There are many cultural and ecological compromises going on. An example is the feral pig situation. There are a lot of ongoing studies to better understand and prevent biological invasions on islands, not just in Hawaii, but across the globe. And we are changing the evolution drastically for Hawaii species because of their unique adaptations they possess and the species that we are introducing. And we really need to increase public appreciation for biodiversity to solve a lot of these problems that Hawaii and elsewhere faces. Thanks.